So you've come to this video wanting to climb to Diamond in Season 9. You've seen the guy with that shiny gem-encrusted border and thought, I want to be that guy. I want to be the Mac Daddy. Well, in that case, I can teach you the skills. But there is something that I need from you, and that is to be honest with yourself. Because if you're not already Diamond and you want to be Diamond, then you're definitely doing things wrong. And if you're not honest with yourself, you're just going to be another Hardstuck. So here's how this video is going to work. I'm going to tell you what you need to do or not to do, and if you listen to me, then you're going to climb. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, let me clear a few things up. Firstly, I'm going to be making videos in the future detailing each of the points I bring up in this video. Those videos are going to explain exactly what you should be doing and why and how you should be doing it, so make sure you subscribe to see that content when it comes out. The points in this video aren't listed in any particular order, but if you can't do any single one of them, then you've still got work to do. Mostly this video is to be used as reference for the future, thinking, what do I need to improve on? Now the points in this video are grouped into sections. The first section is knowledge, the second is ingrained practices, and the third is active thinking. I'll explain what I mean by each of these once we get to their respective sections. Knowledge. The stuff in this section can be learned without ever touching the game. You gotta spend some time on the wiki, watching and analysing pros, or watching educational YouTuber or streamer content. Being here is a good first step. First point. You gotta learn all the champions and their abilities. If you don't know all the champions and what they do, you're gonna have a bad time. Something will happen like an Aurelian Soul Main travelling over the wall behind you, and it'll run you down, and then the enemy team are gonna win because it's 5v4, or because you didn't know what Aurelian Soul did. So if you don't know what all the champions are, and what all their abilities are, make sure you read up on the wiki, or just play as many games as you can so that you find out what they are. Go into some custom games, play the champions, play in the practice tour, figure out what they do, and then try and figure out how they fit into the game. 2. You gotta pick 1 to 3 champions to play in ranked only. Now this isn't really knowledge based, but it is something that you can know before you go into a game. You need to understand exactly how the champions fit into the game, and you're only going to do that by playing those champions a lot. As someone who's climbed very successfully, very recently on a single champion, you're going to have to trust me on this one. There's some other things that you'll learn while playing a small pool of champs, such as how and why certain champions fit into the meta, how champions should position in teamfights and on the map, a champion's correct playstyle, and then finally an understanding of team comps and how champions fit into different team comps. Other people have already played thousands and thousands of games on your champion, so utilise their knowledge. For instance, I like Pantheon, I play a lot of Pantheon, so I watch Keegan, who's the best Pantheon in NA and arguably in the world. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. 3. Learn all the items in the game. Similar to knowing what all the champions are and what they do, you also need to know what the items do. If not, maybe the enemy team will pick up an Ohm Wrecker, and if you don't know what it does, they'll dive you, kill you, and then end the game. Also, a support can pick up a Mikaels and really mess you up if you think your CC is going to land on the AD carry and it's a free kill. And it'll bait you in and mean that you die. So make sure you know what the items are and what they do. 4. Understand when to buy certain items. Knowing when and how to itemize could keep you alive in a teamfight, or it could make the difference between killing a high priority target and getting aced. If you build rubbish, your damage output and survivability will take a massive hit. You can use websites like www.lolvvv.com to see what the pros build, but you need to use this as a tool. You much rather understand when and how to build during a game, so that you can respond to different scenarios accordingly. You don't just want to follow the recipe and then build the same items every game, in the same order. Unless, of course it's correct in that game. This is another one where you can get knowledge from others who have done it before. 5. Read the patch notes. If you haven't read the patch notes, then the opposing laner could have a rune that got buffed, and then you miscalculate how much damage they're going to do and it gets you killed. Maybe a champion got buffed, and then you would have banned that champion if you knew that, but you didn't, so they ace your team and you lose the game. Make sure you read the patch notes, it's very important. That's all for the knowledge section. Next is ingrained practices. So this is the stuff you need to practice until it happens without you having to actively think about it. You'll need to make active decisions utilising this stuff, but you'll utilise it passively. So that you make the decisions actively, but you kind of already know what's backing you up before you go into the decision. This is the stuff that takes the most time, the most playing, but if you're watching this, you probably play a bunch anyway, so make sure you can do all of this stuff. Firstly, if you can't get 70 to 80 CS by 10 minutes, then you're trolling, really. If you can't get 160 CS by 20 minutes, you're also trolling. You need to be able to get these numbers without thinking about it. You don't need to hit the numbers every single game, because sometimes games are all about fighting. But the truth of the matter is, if you can't hit these numbers in live games against live humans consistently in the average game, then you're trolling. You should be able to take fights and take objectives and still keep up with these numbers. If those fights and objectives aren't happening, you should be getting closer to 100 CS and 200 CS respectively, although it's still quite hard to do. But if you can't do it, then you're definitely not getting diamond. 2. Now we have some of the basic mechanics of the game. We've already sort of mentioned last hitting, but it's still very important. You need to be able to do this effectively and consistently. You need to be able to use active items and item actives, so making sure you press your QSS or press a potion as soon as you go into an early game skirmish. You need to make sure that you can land your abilities if they're skill shots and dodge enemy skill shots too. If you can't do this, then you need to practice a lot. Checking the minimap and utilizing pings is another basic. Make sure you're doing this all the time. You want to communicate as effectively as you can with your teammates in solo queue without getting yourself tilted. Mute the chat if you need to, but pings are always very helpful. Unless of course somebody's just spamming it on yourself. But if somebody goes missing from your lane, make sure you ping it. Make sure you ping wards, make sure you ping everything. Utilize the pings as effectively as you can. Going on to the not so basic mechanics of the game. Things to think about are champion damage. You need to have an acute awareness of how much damage any given champion will be able to output at any particular point in the game. This is super useful. If you know this stuff, you can make some great decisions when it comes to fighting. You can break those down a little bit more specifically with trading, which is generally defined as exchanging damage with the enemy without fully committing to the fight. A good trade is when you come out on top, and a bad trade is obviously when you come out behind. If you know how much damage that you're going to do in a trade, then it's always favourable, and it could mean that eventually you force them out of the lane, giving yourself a gold and XP advantage. Now, adverse to trading is all-ins, which is where you actually fully commit to a fight. So if you know how much damage you do in an all-in versus how much damage the enemy does in an all-in, then you know whether to play aggressive or passive accordingly. It's something that I utilise a lot, especially when I'm playing in lower elos, because people don't have a good idea of this, and I can easily get myself solo kills at level 2 or level 3, seeing as I know that I have the power with the all-in. Item power spikes. You need to be checking when you and your opposition get strong, particularly with the items. If they base and TV back to the lane and you don't respect that they've come back with an item, then you're going to start losing the trades and losing the all-ins. If you just go in for a fight, then suddenly you're losing that fight that you were winning before because you didn't check their items. They could even TP out vision and then you won't know about it. If you haven't actually checked their items, you won't think about it, and then you'll lose the fight, and then your lane is lost all of a sudden. Certain champions rely on item power spikes a lot more than others. For instance, a Jax, when he picks up a Sheen, he gets a pretty decent power spike in the early game, and then once he hits Triforce, it's a much bigger power spike. If you don't respect that he's suddenly come back with this item, you're going to have a bad time. Power differentials. This is some of the stuff that we've already talked about, but it also includes checking somebody's CS, their kills, their assists, their levels, and the items that they've got, all sort of bundled into one. A champion hitting level 16 could become a massive issue, whereas before they weren't. A good champion to look at here is Kassadin. His cooldowns get so much lower on his ultimate at level 16, and by that point he generally has a lot of mana from his items, so he becomes suddenly way scarier than he was at level 15. It's a good idea to know how strong a champion is with taking all this stuff into account. Tracking important cooldowns. Typing enemy summoners into the chat is great, and it allows you and your team to know when you can abuse someone. You don't necessarily need to do this, but it is a good practice to get into, especially if you play support. Having an idea of when an enemy's ultimate is going to come up as well is also super useful because it can mean that you win a fight, or lose a fight. If you don't know exactly what the enemy has up and you try and take a fight, then you're pretty much trolling because you're rolling a dice, and you could quite easily come up behind. You always want to make the best decision you can. Understanding and utilising Fog of War and brushes. Now this one is super good and it's really fun. It makes the game way more enjoyable, personally I find. You can play a lot of cheesy champions like AD Sion for instance, which the Baus FFS plays a lot on EU West, and he's high challenger with AD Sion, and he really utilises brushes very effectively. Sometimes you just have to move a little bit out of vision and you can fully charge whatever charge ability, for instance in this case the Sion Q, and do insane damage that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And catching people out like this means that you can suddenly get an objective out of nowhere because it's 5v4 and they can't contest you, even if they were ahead before. Kind of similarly to this is knowing when to ward and where to ward, because it allows you to get picks and also stops you from getting picked yourself. There's very specific places and timings which change dependent on the patch a lot of the time, which can change the way you play the game and where you ward and what time. And it will mean, for instance, that you won't lose your top lane very quickly at level 2, because if you don't respect the gank at level 2, then suddenly you're gonna die. Moving on to active thinking. What do I mean by active thinking? I mean stuff that requires you to be switched on and actively thinking about during the game, and throughout the game. I like to call it brain-on gameplay. This spans the time from champ select to the Nexus falling. The first one is understanding your win conditions. You need to think about what you need to do to win this particular game. Every game. This includes what your team needs to do. If they're doing it, great. If they're not doing it, what do you need to do differently to win? This can mean giving a kill over to somebody who's threatening to go AFK. You don't necessarily want to, but it could be in your benefit to let them get the kill so they keep on playing. Bringing their confidence back can win you that game. There's a fantastic thread on Reddit about this, which I'm going to link in the description, so make sure you check it out. 2. Don't autopilot. If you autopilot, you're going to make stupid mistakes, and you're not going to be working towards a victory. Every game deserves your full attention if you want to climb. If you're autopiloting, you aren't making optimal decisions. 3. Basic macro. Understand that the best way to play the game is often the most efficient way. You want to collect side lanes that are pushing in, or be farming jungle camps, and then looking to make a play when the waves are pushing away, or if the jungle camps are down. If you ever find yourself just running around aimlessly, or standing next to teammates not really achieving anything, then you're trolling, you're stealing XP, and you're just hurting your chances of winning the game. Be there when your team needs you objectives, and understand when doing something else is more important. There's a ton of advanced macro, and this, in my opinion, is what makes the biggest difference between players in low diamond and challenger. I also reckon that it isn't overly important for players below diamond, but having a basic understanding can take you far. If you're collecting loads of gold and the enemies aren't achieving anything, then that's perfect. If the opposite is true, you're in for a bad time. 4. Basic jungle pathing. Jungle pathing is something that goes down a deep rabbit hole, just like macro. The basics you should know are tracking where a jungler starts and which camps they're going to do before they gank. This will give you a good idea of when and where they will be ganking. Avoiding a gank at level 2 and 3 can completely flip a game on its head. If you don't have a basic awareness of where a jungler will be, then you're probably going to end up dying to that early gank, and it's going to make it really hard for you to come back into the game. 5. Basic minion wave control. I've seen a lot of people talk about wave control when considering getting better, but I don't think in-depth wave control is very important for getting to diamond either. If you can understand when you need to push and when you need to let the wave come into you, and how to trade around the wave, then you're pretty much set. If you play every game not considering the wave at all, then you've got things to work on. Thanks for stopping by and checking out this guide. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, please subscribe, as like I said, I'll be going through each of these points in depth with our own videos. If you want some advice about the ADC role specifically, I would like to point you to a good friend of mine who was the inspiration for this guide, SimbaADC. Click his picture to go to his channel. I'm also going to be making some role-specific versions of this guide, with input from other high elo players within the roles. So as always, lots of love to you all. Please follow me at Gimmers TV on Twitter, because I'm trying to become a caster, and it will support me. And good luck on the Rift. Hope you guys climb.